next on our agenda this morning? I don't see anybody in the audience.
And we have received no request to speak.
Okay, very good. I will close public comment. Is there, we have, before we, well, let's do minutes first, if we could. Let's consider the minutes of June 8th, 2023. Committee members have any comments or suggested edits to the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Oh.
Yeah, I do have a question. It's mostly a question on item number 5. It seems like we had 3 actions, one to bifurcate. That sounds good to me from my recollection. Then there's a second action to find construction of the new agricultural barn consistent with the uniform rule. So I don't know if that was, and I guess if you can refresh my memory, because then the third action is to continue the item to today. And that was for the other project. So there's 2 projects. One is to construct a new barn, and the other one was to convert or the construction of a new AEDU. I'm not sure if those were separate or if the project, including both things, both new, both the new barn and the new AEDU are part of the continuance.
Yeah, so you're saying you recall something different than on that second action, instead of saying it's consistent with the uniforms. Did you recall continuing it? Yeah, I kind of do too. Now that you mentioned that.
Yeah, continuing the entire
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, I
Keeping
do too.
keeping both as just one project.
Yes.
That's my recollection.
Yes, I do recall that. Does any other committee member recall that? Because that's kind of what I remember is that's where we went back to say, let's go back and have it reconsidered at the next meeting, all items. Yes.
Right.
I don't recall that. I mean, I know there was what I recall was there was a discussion on the location of the new ag employee dwelling has an influence on how we view the conversion of the current AED to an ADU. But we had already taken the motion on just singularly in the ag building. And so, I mean, the third motion here says continuation of project.
Mhm.
I don't see if there's any problem with how it's agendized today. If in terms of looking at, still looking at the rest of the project today.
Yes,
But my
perhaps,
recollection, we did take the specific actions
Okay.
approved upon.
since there's a difference, perhaps we can not approve these minutes today and just carry them over to the next meeting. And just go back to the.
Or we could just add the word, on the third action, continue consideration of the rest of the project. I mean, but I'm okay. Matthew, do you remember you made one of the motions? Do you remember if we voted on that on your motion?
There was enough back and forth that it's a little hard to recall exactly how we ended up structuring it. I like Stephanie's idea of returning to the recorded record and getting it right, although does that impact us today in terms of how we need to move forward?
I think we still go back to the record and we continue on with our meeting and we look at that agenda item. We can do that first if. do it first meeting. What I would do is continue the minutes until the next meeting. And then as soon as we do make a motion to continue, then we continue on with our meeting. And when we get to that agenda item that pertains to Happy Canyon, which is number 3, we can address that.
So is the uncertainty of specific to the second motion that we didn't take an affirmative motion to approve it?
That's my understanding. What Sergio's saying.
I think for the minutes, so regarding the minutes and the accuracy, continuation is fine. I think depending on how we go today, we may then just take action to affirmatively do something one way or the other. So it may be, so, it may end up being just a clerical action to check the motion.
Yes,
The minutes.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, so, one more, clarification on the reports of committee members section. I would like to add, instead of saying 2 new ag preserve contracts, I want to say Sergio reported 1 new ag preserve contract and 1 assumption of a contract. I remember reporting that one of them was an assumption and one was a brand new one. And then say that they were recorded with the county recorder's office.
Okay, duly noted. Any other comments on the minutes? Someone like to make a motion to continue them till the August meeting?
I'll make a motion that we continue the unapproved minutes of June 8th to the August APAC meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Aye.
Sergio Ricardo,
Aye.
Stephanie Stark,
Aye.
and David Lackey.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
That takes us to agenda management. Do you have any suggestions to make some changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a suggested based on looking at content of our agenda and anticipating that continued item number 3 may be somewhat more involved. I think one maybe option is to move that after our new item number 4 for the Ballard Ranch Winery. And seems that may be a little bit more straightforward, and I think it may then give us more time to focus on the item number 3 for continued item.
Is there any discussion or consensus on that? Okay. All right. We need to take a motion to change the agenda. County Council.
I don't think so. Madam
Okay.
Chair.
All right, very good. So we will just go from item number 2 to now item number 4 and then item number 3. For those of you in the audience who are representing either of those items. Okay, that takes us to, is there any other, anybody from the public who'd like to continue an item that is listed on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. No online, nobody in person, so that will take us to, I believe, our first item. Let's see, so that we are, the continued item, this is Ag Land Properties Incorporated, both number 1 and number 2 are both tied together in that we had written a letter to appear to both parties, but we're addressing Agland Properties first. Is there anybody from Agland Properties who would like to speak on this item that's here to represent the contract, the property? It's been continued a number of times, as you can see. And our recollection is that the surveyor's office was involved with speaking with either party. Well, we're not sure which one, but he is not here today. Okay, so committee members, anybody would like to we continue this item one more month, or see if perhaps anybody from the other party is here? The Joseph Burrow Musico,
Yeah, why don't we
Lucio?
see what, because I think there was a little more activity and status with that property. And so maybe let's understand where that is currently.
Okay. So since we're currently talking about item number one, how can we do that, county council? Can we speak about item number two?
Yeah, we can kind of read item 2 into the record
Okay.
and talk about them both. We'll just want to make sure we. separate
Yes,
the action.
okay. So just to go back, item number one is the Agland Properties, this contract number 01AP004A. So this was to continue eligibility of the Ag Preserve contract and consistency with the uniform rules. And this was following is it a tentative parcel map?
No, so this was following a change in ownership,
Yes, that's right.
which puts the contract in split ownership.
That's right. And so that also involves the second item, which is the Joseph Burrow Musio property, and that's also AP or contract number 01AP004A. So is there anybody who is here today to represent that property? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody in person here. Jonathan, any indications online?
If you are a call-in on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning.
Yeah, this is Charles Goff for Agland Properties. I'm sorry, I couldn't. You weren't hearing me, and I kept talking. Anyway, so now I'm.
That's how these things
I'm
go,
in the
but thank you for being persistent.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm in the conversation now. I've been in communication with Ben Singer about this, and I think the question for my client to go ahead and move forward with this, and I just want to clarify this because I was looking back at my notes from the prior meetings, and I appreciate the committee's patience over all these months. But Mr. Singer had given me some information regarding projected costs to move forward with the application. And so the clarification I just needed to go forward with this, and I know that before I had talked to Alex, and I was told that parcels 8 and 12, there was a lot line adjustment, and so they're treated as one legal lot, and then we have Hen, I think is the other parcel. So there's two technically. My question is, can my client do one application to cover these parcels? That's the question, because I got the projected costs from Mr. Singer. So.
Yeah, so as far as, because of the change in ownership, there's parcels that are in now ownership for Agland Properties. So, the landowner certainly has the option of including all of those contiguous parcels in a single application for new Ag Preserve contract.
Okay. So Mr. Sudi is, on behalf of Agland, he's prepared to go forward with the application based on the information Mr. Singer provided to me on the projected costs.
And David, and so this means that there will be only one new contract if this goes through the way under one application.
So who is the parent in this owner? Who was the original owner and then who was the new owner?
So Museo was the original owner.
Okay,
And
yeah,
then
so
they sold
so
it
Ag
for-
Land Properties would get a new contract and Museo would get a replacement contract.
So Schaefer sold the property to my client. I don't know if that figures in at all, but
Right, the original change in ownership, the first change in ownership was to Schaefer. And then Schaefer sold to Ag Land.
Okay,
right.
but at
So-
least Museo is going back into the lineage is at one time owned all of these parcels.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so there will be two new contracts.
Effectively, yeah, I mean, they're, for practical purposes, they're treated as, contracts. We just need to get them in correct individual ownerships.
And this is the question that always comes up, and I know we've discussed this before, but is there, should the original contract be non-renewed first and then get the two new ones, or? I know we've discussed it, but I'm always unclear as to what the process should be.
And Callie looks like she has a thought. So an example that I recall is where we'd have a similar situation where a portion of the original contract was sold off and there was inactivity from one of the,
Exactly, and so that's always my
Owners
fear. that
in those cases where we knew that was happening, I think we did recommend non-renewing the contract because that would take care of the non-responder. And then in that case, the original owner came in for a new contract.
Right, and so that's always the question, I mean,
And I think that's kind of why we're tracking this too, because it sounds like now Ag Land Properties, from what we've heard today, is likely to submit an application. And then it had sounded like in our meeting in May that Museo property interests were similarly at a close point of submitting an application. So they may come in close, not concurrent, but I think in that case, I don't know that there's a need to affirmatively non-renew. I don't.
well, one of the issues too is that when they're done separately, one could be effective this year and the other could be effective not this year, maybe next year. It depends on when the new contracts are recorded. If, and then so it just becomes a little bit of an issue with the assessor's office in do we assess one of the contracts as a non-renewed contract? Or do we, because it makes a big difference when the contracts are non-renewed. So that's just it, it's just, hopefully, I guess my point is that hopefully they're done at the same time. But there's no way for us to enforce that. There's no way for us to make that happen, I guess.
Yeah, I understand. I guess, yeah, I mean, we still have a window because typically, if they get their applications in before September 30th, it's likely that it'll, get to us and then P&D will be able to take that to the board by the end of the calendar year. But so we still have some daylight and hope.
Hey, Puck, this is Ben Singer. I'm acting as planner for both of these. I can give a little bit more information kind of on where they stand that I think will help, which is that I do have.
Yes, please do. Thank you, Mr. Singer.
I do have applications in for the two either new or replacement contracts. They're older applications. They're actually from before the change in ownership due to a lot line adjustment. I'm just waiting on getting kind of updated application forms from both of the current parties, just so I can change all the information in our system. But I do kind of have, they're both 18 AGP cases that I can potentially be able to take this year, and that way, since I have those in already, I can help control a little bit and make sure that they go at the same time. I am a little bit unsure, just kind of to what Sergio was talking about, how the non-renewal will work. If it's a county initiated non-renewal, we need to do that a lot more timely, just because even if both parties are okay with it, I think we still have the legal noticing. So we usually need to get that done. I believe the board has to approve it before the end of October to meet the noticing timeline for that. So I'm not sure how that would work out with doing a county initiated non-renewal on this contract by then, and then doing a new and a replacement contract.
So what I heard, Ben, is that from David is that perhaps the non-renewal is not necessary now that we are tracking it somehow. So yeah, you can put that aside, I guess. There's no need for a non-renewal. Is that what we?
Madam Chair, committee members, I think that's a good approach, but it's potentially helpful for the applicants to understand that non-renewal could be pursued in the future in the event that things don't move quickly enough. And it sounds like we need updated applications and as soon as possible.
And then just to continue with that line of thought, I mean, that's sort of why we've been continuing these, where at some point the applications will be complete and those will be placed on our agenda as separate new items to consider those either new or replacement contracts. And then, like often we do, if we take action on that, we'll drop the continued item because really it's a procedural item for us to still retain our ability to take action or to send a 60-day letter if that's not necessary.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Thank you.
So yeah, Ben, once the applications are in, then we can agendize those on our meeting and we can be dispensed with the continuing every month. So thank you for being coordinating it. We appreciate that very much. And to the gentleman that was representing the Agland Properties, I don't recall your name, but did you get your questions answered?
I think I understand. My client will go ahead and apply for a new contract. He can include all the parcels on one application.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We appreciate your cooperation with that. So just that we can move on with the process.
Yes,
Thank you.
And I will let you know as well before you move off of these items. I have been in communication with the agent for the Museo Trust properties as well. I know that they're working on getting all the application forms ready and to submit them to me as well.
Thank you. And so Ben, you're thinking maybe we could continue it in, we think, next month, or because you'd have to have the application in, you'd have to get it processed in the planning department. Any input?
If they get the applications into me, I can process it very quickly just since I have the kind of old cases open. I just need to change the information on them. I don't really need to create anything new. Okay. So that's very quick. We can try next month. I know that they've had some delays in getting all of these things ready, but I can, definitely follow up diligently with them to try to get it all. If we do continue these to next month and I have the applications in and everything ready for that, would I just work with hearing support to drop the continuances and add them as regular items, as new items, or would it just be that the continuances could act as those new items?
For that last question, Ben, no, you would just work with hearing support to have these as new items for the contracts. The continued items will still be on the agenda and we'll deal with those because they're sort of a tracking mechanism at this point.
Understood.
One question for the committee is that sounds like these are slightly at different timeframes. So in a hypothetical, if Museo is complete and ready like 1 month before, would we rather have continue both items to like September, just to hopefully that they would be both agendas at that same time?
I'm okay with that, but I'm thinking about the clerk of the board recording. Is there recording the new contracts? Don't they need to have all the documents by a certain date? To record the new contracts, to be able to have them recorded before, let's say, before December 31st.
I mean, Ben might have more information. I mean, historically, we take most of our new contracts. I mean, a lot of them are grouped towards the end, either in November or first part of December. And so I think that it's the board action to approve the contract. I don't know the recording component, if that has a.
Ben, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Okay.
Yes, they do need a little bit of time. Usually if we get it to the board by the first board hearing in December, that provides the clerk of the board, 2 to 3 weeks before the end of the year to get it recorded. And that's historically been enough time. And that's something that, it may be an assumption that we may do or don't want to make, but if this gets continued to September, if both of these do, and I get the materials in advance of that, maybe I can get it in time for the August one. But even if it's continued to September, I can begin my part of the work to get the contracts ready for the board before they go back to APAC for kind of your approval of them. And that way we can just try to, line up a couple things so that the timing still works out. But in general, as long as we get them to the board for approval by the start of December, we haven't had too many issues with getting them recorded by the end of the year.
Thank you.
Just an honest question here, and perhaps it's not pertinent for these items since we're far enough along, but for the future, it's clear that this process has taken up an extraordinary amount of time for the commission to have to manage and keep track of, as given by the number of continuances. I'm just wondering, what is the disadvantage of canceling the contract? And because, these items are clearly out of compliance, and then that puts the burden. I know that the committee wants to, of course, work with applicants, but it then forces applicants to be a little bit more proactive and puts the burden of compliance with the Williamson Act on them to get in replacement applications before the end of the year. I'm just thinking, for the future, earlier in the year when this issue comes up, I mean, would it be appropriate to have a county initiated non-renewal and then allow the applicants to follow up in the way that they need to anyways? And it might incentivize cooperation a little bit faster.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a cost for the county to do the county initiated non-renewal, because then we have to take that to the board and there's a cost. And so, I think it's a mix of, we've tried to provide notice to appear to clearly inform them of the potential consequences of inaction. And then in this, it was somewhat complicated because you've got two different owners and there were different reasons for, understandably, in terms of owners, kind of the time it took to get to this point. And so, I mean, you're right. It's one of those balancing things, I think, that the committee has typically tried to. We want to keep people in the program if they're interested in, but at some point, if they're non-responsive, or, that certainly is a more direct, obviously, pathway.
Thank you, though, for that comment. I like that spirit of, maybe we can work on this in the back end, or it's at the planning and development point, which is early on in the application, because, I processed those applications years ago and it's rough because you get it really late and the information's old and contacting. It's not, burden is not on the applicant to fix that. So thank you for the comment. I like that idea of process improvement. Thank you for efficiency.
So I think council had suggested we take two separate motions on this, so. Oh, yes,
So we're going to take public comment on both items before we move forward with the motion. Is there anybody here who'd like to make a comment on item number 1, Agland Properties Incorporated? Seeing nobody here. Jonathan, anybody online?
Seeing nobody online.
Okay, close public comment for that. And also item number 2, the Joseph Burrow Museo Revocable Family Trust. Is there anyone online who'd like to, or in person who would like to speak on this item for the public? Okay.
If you'd like to make a public comment on this for the call-in, press star 9 to raise your hand and star 6 to unmute. Seeing none,
Okay, close public comment and we'll entertain a motion.
so I move that the committee continue the Agland Properties Inc. Project to the September APAC agenda, provide the owner time to submit an application for a new ag preserve contract.
I second that motion.
we'll do a roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Aye.
Sergio Ricardo,
I,
Stephanie Stark,
Aye,
and David Lackey. Aye. Motion carries 4-0.
thank you.
And for item number 2, I'd make a motion that the committee continue the Joseph Burrow Museo Revocable Family Trust project to the September APAC meeting to provide the owner an opportunity to submit an application for a replacement contract.
Second that motion.
Okay, we'll do a roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Aye.
Sergio Ricardo,
I,
Stephanie Stark,
Aye.
and David Lackey.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
And thank you very much for coming for the Agland Properties, sir, and speaking. And Ben, that would be terrific if you could also come as the planner back to our September APAC meeting. We appreciate your facilitation in getting this finished.
Yep, will do, and hopefully we'll have applications in as separate items for that meeting as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so as we discussed earlier in the meeting, we moved our agenda around a little bit. So item number 3 is going to be pushed back a little bit. We're going to hear the new item number 4, which is Ballard Ranch Winery. This is Ag Preserve Contract 16 AP 018. And this is to consider the request of Stephen Peterson, agent for the owner of Solomon Arc of case number 23 DVP 00008. And they are proposing to construct a 6-building winery, tasting room, fermentation building, a barrel storage building, office building, reception building. So development pertaining to the winery, and the contract is a 48.21 acre parcel. And it's Ag 140 and it's in San Ynez Valley. The planner is Francisco Vargas. Are you here today, sir?
Hello, Francisco here.
Hi, Francisco. Welcome to the Ag Preserve Advisory Committee meeting. And then do we also have a representative from the project here today? Agent or owner?
I'm sorry, it looks like he's over in the attendees section, so I'm going to move
Oh.
over to panelists.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
You're going to be exited really quick, but you're going to be jumped back in once you move over to panelist. 1 second.
Okay. All right, so is there perhaps the planner or the agent would like to give us a brief overview? We've gotten quite a bit of information in the box account for the planning or the committee.
Francisco here, the planner, county planner. I believe Stephen, the agent, will be giving a brief overview of the project.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi, this is Stephen Peterson. I'm trying to start my video, but
Okay.
calling
be
me the
patient.
host has stopped it. Anyway, I'm Stephen Peterson with Flowers and Associates. We're the agents representing Solomon Aurier, the property owner here. And what is proposed is a 19,000 square foot winery on the property. This is a 48 acre parcel that's under ag preserve, and it's part of the larger Ballard Ranch, which is 125 acres in total and comprises 3 parcels. I think you can see it on your screen in the vicinity map, the project location there.
Yes.
So the parcel outlined in red is the one we're talking about today. But the parcel to the right of that is also under the same ownership. And then the parcel up behind it on the mesa is also part of the same ranch. So in total, it's 125 acres, the 3 parcels, but this one is 48. And historically, the property has been a horse breeding and boarding facility, and that has been how it is qualified for its ag preserve status. And now the property is transitioning towards being more of a vineyard wine focused parcel. So I do have on the line our vineyard manager, Jeff Newton. I think if detailed question about the ag operations come up, I think he's online here and may be able to jump in as well. But we prepared a couple of exhibits that we provided to you guys, trying to address the project's consistency with the uniform rules. And the key points there, one of them was dated 4/10/23, and one of them was dated 4/20/23. So it would be ideal if we could pull those up. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this first one, you can see the vineyard acreage there, which is 27 acres of vineyard. The uniform rules require more than 50% of the property to be in cultivated ag. So we're well over the 50% requirement there. On this map, you can see where the vineyards are located, where the winery area will be with the thicker dashed black line, and there will be some irrigated pasture maintained. So in the past, it was a predominantly horse facility with a little bit of vineyard on it. It's switching over to mostly vineyards with a little bit of horse facility on it. Also, the size of the winery area, as per the uniform rules, has to be less than 10% of the parcel size. And we're well under that. As you can see, it's 2.46 acres out of the 48 acre parcel there. We can probably move on to the other exhibit that we prepared. This one we made to speak to the requirements about how much of the grape production for the winery needs to come from on site. And you can see that there are vineyards both on this parcel and on the neighboring parcel, which is under the same ownership and under its own separate ag preserve contract. So as per the uniform rules, at least 51% of the winery case production needs to come from grapes grown on the premises or on another premises under ag preserve and under the same ownership in Santa Barbara County. So we're counting in both of the parcels here, and we purposely sized the winery to be at the qualifying level for this. So with 51% of the winery case production coming from these parcels. So our vineyard manager is estimating about 300 cases per acre, or 11,340 cases could be produced from the vineyards on the site. So to make that 51%, we sized the winery to be a 22,235 case winery. And then there's also a requirement in the last item in the ag preserve rules that we thought were relevant, was that 20% of the grapes grown on the parcel with the winery, 20% of the case production has to be from grapes grown on the parcel, and we're well over that standard as well. So I think that covers the basics of it. Perhaps Jeff Newton wants to chime in now. Is he available?
Okay, let me bring it back to our committee members and see if there's any specific questions committee members have at this point.
I do have a question about the vineyard. Has the vineyard been planted, and when, if it has?
Yeah, let me see if is Jeff on here. Let's see. My understanding, I think Jeff is trying to get on here and I'll be on here momentarily, but I believe that all of the vineyard has been planted except for the 9.58 acre section to the west of the winery area that you see there on the map. That my understanding is that that is currently being installed now.
So is that is the plan to plant it this year, or when is the planting going to occur for those 9 acres?
My understanding is in the next couple of months it's supposed to go in. They were doing some site preparation and I don't think you would call it grading, but kind of recontouring of that 9.5 acres. And then we're going to be installing the grapes immediately after that.
And just so you know, the county sends a questionnaire, and the questionnaire was not responded to this year. We just need to have this information sent to the county. The assessors sends the questionnaire usually in January, and I don't think there was a response yet to that questionnaire.
Okay, I'd be happy to make sure that that gets answered, and perhaps since we had a change of ownership on the site, I don't know if that caused some confusion, but you could certainly send it to my attention.
Okay. And then my second question is about the horse operation. Is this now incidental? Well, I guess it is incidental now. So do you still have a horse operation? Is the breeding and boarding still going on with the property?
Yes, the horse operation is becoming a incidental ag use on this parcel. On the parcel to the east, That's the primary ag use on that parcel that is qualifying it for its ag preserve status. And in the past, the equestrian use had been the qualifying primary ag use on this parcel. But as I mentioned, it's switching over to vineyard and wine for the primary use, but they are keeping a little bit of irrigated pasture, as you can see. And there's also a row of corrals, about 4.5 acres of corrals. But we're not qualifying for our ag preserve status under the horse use. It's under the vineyard wine use now.
So to clarify, then the horse operation is on the other property, and so meaning the main operation is on a separate contract, and just the corrals are on this subject property.
That's correct.
So Stephen, on the 9.8 acre vineyard that's in process, so I guess part of what we're looking for assurances is that is going to be planted. And typically, one way of doing that is looking at, having a planting plan or receipts, like have the vines been purchased, and also a timing in terms of installation. So I don't recall seeing any of that information in the application materials. I mean, it's at least on the vines. Have the vines been planted, and if necessary, are there receipts that could be submitted to confirm that?
Yeah, our vineyard consultant, vineyard manager, Jeff Newton, he's texting me saying that he's on the phone trying to get into this meeting, but that he's muted. I don't know if there's anything you guys can.
Yeah, we're gonna work on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
if Jeff can press *9 on his phone, that'll allow him to unmute himself.
Okay, I'm gonna text him that information.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to take the opportunity to see if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak on this item, either in person or online.
Not seeing any
Okay.
requests to speak.
Thank you. We'll close public comment.
Change,
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to change the subject just slightly while we,
Sure.
with this change of the primary agricultural crop, it presents certain complications, perhaps. I'm just trying to think about, Sergio was asking about the incidental boarding and breeding facility, and now that the horse operation is no longer the qualifying ag, we would need to switch it into an incidental boarding and breeding facility, which has different restrictions about the amount of ground it can take up on a contract. I'm concerned that what they're proposing and leaving behind of the horse operation exceeds those numbers. And it's further complicated by the fact that there's an adjacent contract that it sounds like is still using the horse boarding and breeding facility as their qualifying ag. So I don't know that I have a solution here, but I'm just sort of bringing it to the committee's attention. Is there a requirement that the acreage on this particular contract be diminished? Irrigated pasture removed, corrals be removed, that, horse track removed, because it is neither clustered nor under the 3% or 2 acre threshold, if I'm reading that correctly.
So yeah, those are all good insights. So with the corrals, you're correct. So, if the vineyard essentially is going to be the qualifying agriculture, then we look at the corrals, and the rules do allow to have an incidental animal boarding breeding. They've been limited to 3%. 3% of their premises. Contract size would be 1.44 acres, and obviously we have more than that. So that's one thing we need to address. The irrigated pasture, they can do other forms of ag, so that's not really a concern, but I think from uniform rules perspective, We would also want to confirm on the, I guess it's the adjacent contract is contract 16 AP 017 to the east. That they still maintain their irrigated pasture qualifying ag with the removal of, or the installation of the vineyards there. So that would be one confirmation and information we would want to get from the applicant. And I have a foggy memory that we recently looked at this contract within the last year, just because of the ag employee dwelling and kind of the ag employee allocation was, I think, to the north of the property. And the ag employees were kind of working, you know, in terms of demonstrated need, they were working on both. And so we kind of understood that and made sense to have them located and concentrated in that location. Whether that concept feeds into these corrals and what we do with it, certainly something for consideration.
I'm hearing from Jeff Newton that he's on the call and he's pressed *9 and he's trying to get on there.
Sorry, *6 to unmute and *9 to raise his hand. So Jeff, if you can hear us, *6 to unmute, *9 to raise your hand.
Can't you unmute him, Jonathan, on your end?
Unfortunately not. I can ask him to talk on my end, but I can't unmute a cell call in.
I think he's working on it. Yes, to respond to Mr. Lackey's comment, you guys did see this parcel maybe a year ago now for the 4 ag employee dwellings that are up at the northwestern corner. And both of these parcels, as well as the third parcel that's up on the mesa behind it, are all operated together as one agricultural operation. So as far as the people living in those ag employee dwellings, they're folks that work across all 3 of these different parcels in both the horse and the wine operations.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what we're trying to do is they're going to have our hearing support contact. Was it Jeff? The online.
Yes, Jeff.
We'll try and call you directly, sir, if you are still on your phone. So expect that phone call from our hearing support. Go ahead and speak on. If you had something else to say, sir, sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. I was just responding to Mr. Lackey. He asked about the ag employee dwellings on this site that you guys reviewed about a year ago and approved. Yeah, they're currently in the building permit phase with the county, so we're not too far away from going ahead and building those. Their location is marked on the map that you've got up on the screen. It's in the upper left-hand corner, right above the white block that says the APN number. You see that square up there? That's where they're going to be located, and it's for 800 square foot homes for ag employees on the site. And as I mentioned, the 3 parcels that comprise the Ballard Ranch are operated as a unit altogether, and those employees work on both the wine and the horse equestrian activities on the site. But the dwellings haven't been built yet, right? So they're not there yet. But
we also have Jeff on the line, I think. So if there's something we want to, I think our questions were about the vineyard plantings, if they aren't already planted, were they already purchased, and a little bit about the planting plan and the project going forward as far as meeting the agricultural production. Go ahead, sir. Jeff.
Yes, I apologize for the communication issue. I did hear the question, were there receipts for vine purchase and such. We're talking about the 9-acre parcel, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. We have not purchased the vines yet, but what we have done, we have a quote for the irrigation system. That's one step forward. We've also communicated with our dirt moving folks to the contractors to move the or to rip the soil and such. So we are moving forward in a planning way, but have not ordered vines yet.
So with those steps that you've taken to date, I mean, do you have an anticipated date of when you would purchase the vines and install the vines?
Yeah. So as you may know, nurseries do the grafting in January, pretty much December, January, February. So the order that we would make, if you make now or in several months to come, and it really doesn't matter. The vines would be arriving in probably June of next year. But we'll be needing that call to make our order pretty soon. We've been kicking around what varieties we're going to plant in there, so we know there'll be white varieties. Probably Viognier, Roussan, Marsan, Rhone whites.
And so for the other areas that are indicated in vineyard, everything else is already planted. It's just this 9-acre area that's still to be planted.
Yeah, so the parcel, the 16-acre parcel to the south of the 9-acre parcel we're talking about, the one that abuts the highway,
Mhm.
46, that's been planted already to Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So that block is being trained as we speak, actually. And then off to the racetrack area, we planted 3 acres of Grenache inside that racetrack, and that's growing now as well.
And I think the number, at least on our map, shows, I can't see it now, but it's 4 So you're going to plant some additional acreage in that racetrack area beyond what you've already currently planted?
It's full, actually. We planted as many vines as we can in there.
So what does that number? I can't see what that number is.
It should be 3.
Okay, so our map says it's 4 point something.
3.9.
Okay. So the 4 point whatever is probably the acreage, all of the acreage inside the racetrack, but for vineyard purposes, we need turnaround space. So this is the 3 acres is the actual number of vines.
Right.
Right there.
Yeah. I mean, for our calculations, we're looking at acres of planted vineyards, not the, so at least.
That would be 3.
So at least the calculation, so maybe Mr. Peterson can respond to that. So that would appear that would be less than the 51% by 1.39 acres.
And then in that same area, there's the main road, the main north-south road, dividing the property, right? And so if you're looking on the east portion, which includes the racetrack, there are 2 other blocks there. Do you have the acreages for those?
Yeah, the one kind of right next to that main road, but on that same parcel is 3.29 acres.
It's 2 acres. Along the south, which is Grenache, is 2.7 acres.
Well, I can certainly go through this map with Mr. Newton and have him refine it. If there are some areas that there were some roads or something that we didn't back out of these numbers, we can certainly refine this a little bit.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we would need to get, certainly for both what's planted, the actual planted vineyard acreage and the proposed planted vineyard acreage. And also kind of information, I think, that the vineyard manager had, provided in terms of the timing of the installation of that 9.8 acres. Kind of creating just a focused description or planting plan that describes what's going to occur, the amount of planted acreage, and when the timing of both purchase of the vines and installation is expected to occur.
David, and just for clarification purposes, and I this is a question, I guess, for the committee. So we're looking at plantings on a separate contract, even though it's under the same ownership. Is that okay? I mean, are we? I understand that it's one ownership, one operation, but it's still two separate contracts.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so our rule for the planting is that it's 51% of the grapes that are processed at the winery need to come from the premises on the winery and or any other contracted land that the owner owns within Santa Barbara County. And so, yeah, both of these, the planted acreage collective for these two contracts that are adjacent to each other that are owned by the same owner would need to meet that 51%. And so that's why it sounds like these are the only two contracts that the owners have that have vineyards that could help meet that 51%. And so that's why we want to. And it's separate for, I mean, in the zoning ordinance for permitting the wineries, there's separate planting requirements. And since I'm assuming the winery application isn't including the parcel to the east, they're going to need to then just demonstrate that I think it's 1 acre per 1,000 cases, which they would then have to demonstrate that they have 20 acres planted or 19 point whatever acres planted to meet that zoning ordinance requirement on the parcel.
And then along the same lines, I know that the employee house was already brought to the APAC and approved. But now that the land use is changing from what it was when it came to APAC last year, do we need to revisit that again and make sure that that it's still in compliance with the uniform rules?
I mean, I think what we heard just in the presentation is that those same employees are going to work on both operations that are mixed, combination of the continuation on the eastern parcel, primarily for the equestrian facility, and also involved in agricultural activities for the vineyards. And so if, I think certainly confirmation if that's the case, that those same employees will be still working collectively on those. I think at least I would view that as important to know that, but I don't know that we need to do a formal reevaluation of it.
Yeah, and isn't when planning issues that conditional use permit for that, do they usually, is it a 3-year?
They don't, no, there's no,
Okay.
they don't do the time frame
Okay.
anymore. But they do look at all other, structures on, as far as legal structures on in continued
Yeah.
use. And so, I would presume there's probably a lot of demonstrated need for
Mhm.
equally for the activities. They're different, but
Yeah.
associated with the vineyard operation.
It's a good question, though. Any other questions, Sergio?
So just to clarify, Sergio, and I'm glad you brought up that for the owners to submit their annual questionnaire,
Yes.
and I'm presuming they would update that with whatever's planted, because that's part of the information that's important for your assessment is how many planted vineyards, what varietals, those type of things.
That's correct. Yeah, we need to know the different varieties of grapes.
Were you going to say something, sir?
Yes, I was just gonna ask regarding the annual questionnaire, who should I get in contact with to get a copy of that so we can fill it out?
Yes, absolutely. You can contact the assessor's office and ask for the ag appraiser, and we'll send you a questionnaire.
Okay, great, will do.
So as we were talking, I was just looking through and have, it's a list of things that I have is we requested a map maybe showing more accurate planting and depiction of the existing vineyards as well as proposed vineyards. Also a planting plan for the vineyard, indicating when you might be purchasing, installing, planting the vineyards. You mentioned the varietals, so that would be helpful too. Also an annual questionnaire. And we had brought up, Matthew brought up the question about the adjacent parcel and contracted land that had used the more of the boarding and breeding support structures. So would we want some like information that would be explaining to us what they're going to, how they're going to be making changes to that operation, because it might affect the qualifying adjacent property and how it might continue to qualify for uniform rules.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so some sort of just a narrative. Okay, I'll say a narrative describing, say, the boarding and breeding operation on the adjacent, it was the property to the east?
To the east.
And what was the?
Oh, it's contract
Okay.
16 AP 17.
16 AP 017?
Yes.
Okay.
So now I'm thinking of a new question. Do we want to bring in this this other contract to make sure that they're now in compliance?
Yes, so, well, it should we, and if we do that, we'd need to agendize it too differently, right? Yeah, county council shaking her head.
I mean, I think the main, I'm sorry. At least I think it's an easy confirmation that they still have the 20 acres of irrigated pasture. I think that was the main thing that,
Yeah,
in terms of, does that affect their ongoing eligibility? There's obviously limitations on corral size, but if it's on the other property, it's not going to affect.
less of a
It's
concern.
less of a concern. So I don't think we're going to need to get to that point if we have it. I just haven't done the additive pasture calculation yet, but
Okay,
if we can get that confirmation, I think.
so as long as we have a graphic depiction next time they come back that shows that 20 acres,
That they
which
still
is the
have collectively,
qualifying
yes.
component, right? Does that make sense? To the agent and land or representatives for the project? We're looking at,
Yes,
it's that, okay, it's that
Yeah.
irrigated pasture that we're really looking for to be depicted on that.
And they kind of do that in the
yeah,
box right
yeah.
now. I just haven't done the quick math.
Yeah. We like acreage calculations right on those polygons. That's very helpful, those tags.
Just a clarifying question on that point, because I felt like we were speaking two different languages a moment ago. I mean, the vineyard manager seemed to be talking about actual acres of grapes planted. And of course, that, to his point, there's always sort of supporting roads and turnarounds that we do consider agricultural acreage, although he may not in his planting calculations. Is that fair and accurate? I just want to help them calculate their acreage accurately.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, when I talk about vineyard acres, from my vineyard management point of view, I'm interested in the vines themselves, if we're calibrating spray rigs and such, or harvesting and needing to know how many tons per acre we have. But basically, we need the roads for turnaround space. And so, from my point of view, the edges of the vineyard, the turnaround space should, for this purpose, all be included in the total calculation of the vineyard area. I mean, as you were saying, you know, the irrigated pasture, that is the boundary by boundary, because, you know, there's grass growing from the fence line to fence line to fence line to fence line in a square piece. But you know, with regard to the vineyards, I think it's important to include the turnaround space. Otherwise, we couldn't farm the vineyard.
I appreciate that comment. So for our, particularly for any of the, you know, orchards, cultivated row crops, vineyards, all of them have different spacing requirements between rows and things like that. But our requirements are looking at really the, you know, the cases that you can produce per planted acre. And so we're excluding, we're excluding any adjacent ag roads. Obviously important to access that, but we're looking at the sort of the footprint of the planted vineyard from corner to corner, and those calculations. And so those are the acreage calculations that we need to evaluate compliance with the 51%. So because it's 51% of the case production at the winery. So we have historically used I think on the generous side, 300 cases per acre production, which is pretty high for most varietals. And so that goes into, you know, the calculation. So while we acknowledge the value and necessity of the ag roads and turnarounds, we're looking at the kind of the polygon footprint around whatever the planted commodity is.
Yeah, we'll take another look at that and make sure that what we've submitted is accurate, but I think that that's already been done in what we're including here. You know, you can see in the center of the picture on the screen, the main access road that comes right up through the center there. That hasn't been included in the vineyard area. You can see on the west property line, there's access road over there. That's not included in our vineyard area. But no, we're not backing out the space between the rows of vines. And I don't think that that is the intention of how this is supposed to be calculated. So I will definitely take a closer look at this with Jeff and make sure what we're portraying is accurate, but I think that it's generally already been done in what you're seeing here.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a separate question, comment.
Yeah, please go ahead.
There was a comment made about the 300 cases per acre. So at 60 cases per ton, which is pretty reasonable. That, you know, we're suggesting that we're going to be doing 5 tons an acre. These are very, very fertile soils, and the plant density is higher than it is in many vineyards. So we're very confident. We have vineyards all throughout this area, and we're confident about that 5 tons an acre.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kind of another flash from, I think, when we previously looked at this property, and I'm hoping this is the same property, but so that on that eastern property above where it says the barn area, 3.5 acres, I recall that wasn't there a request for temporary events that utilized sort of that space, remember that barn area? I mean, so Mr. Peterson, was there a temporary use permit approved for events on the
Yes.
contract?
Right, on the parcel on the right-hand side, there was a minor CUP approved for some special events. I think it's 8 per year, if I remember correctly. And they're to be held not in the barn, but around that barn. The barn's kind of a plus shaped building, and it's to the northwest. There's a grass area with trees to be an event space, and there's also to the southeast. You can see the dirt area on the map, and there's grass and trees down there. So that's the two places where events would be held. So they would be within that, dashed barn area, but not outside of that on the ag.
So I guess that's kind of a leading question that I have. So for the winery, we haven't really looked at any of the maps. And it's proposing a 6-building winery complex with separate reception building and a separate event barn. So one of the questions that I have is, obviously those are structural development that are focused, at least it appears to be specifically for the winery events that they're also seeking approval. Will the events on the separate contracts be truly separate? Will there'll be, if you're having an event on the eastern property, they'll be able to use event barn space on the winery facility as part of that? How is this going to work, and how is it going to be separate?
Yeah, they're not connected at all in terms of the events. The proposed winery under the winery ordinance, it's a tier 2 winery, and that comes with a certain number of allowed special events under the ordinance that you don't need any additional special permit for. So that's when we're referring to the event barn, that's next to the winery and part of the winery complex of buildings. We could pull up, if you want to look at the floor plans of the winery, you can see the 6 buildings there. So that's a completely separate animal from the parcel to the east. Got a minor CUP to have some special events out in the outdoor area around the barn on the right. So where you're seeing reference to the event barn related to the winery, that's not talking about the barn on the right-hand parcel, on the eastern parcel. That's talking about one of the buildings in the winery complex that's proposed. So I don't know if you guys could pull up the plans. Plan set, I think, sheet. Let's see, what's the best sheet to give you an idea? It's a big set of plans. I'm just looking through my plan set to find the best sheet for you to see the layout of the complex. Yeah, I think you could use sheet 9 of the PDF. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so yes. So let you get the so surrounded by, okay, there we go, perfect. You can see the area that's surrounded by the dashed line. That's the main winery, and it's got 5 different buildings that comprise it. You've got on the south end well, I don't know if this zoom is close enough for you guys for me to call out the individual uses, but then you've got there's 5 of the buildings clustered there within the dotted line, and then look to the north of that, and you see one more building up to the north. That's the event barn associated with the winery. So all of that is inside of the 2 acres and change winery area that was called out in our exhibit. So you've got basically 5 buildings on the south end there, and the 1 building up at the top, the event barn.
So, yeah, appreciate that. So it sounds like what you said is that for the temporary use permit that was approved on the eastern property, those events are going to be self-contained on that property. They're not going to use any of these structurals to host any of the events.
That's correct. And even like the parking wouldn't even be used. One of the conditions of that special events permit on the eastern parcel was that parking of guests would be off-site and they'd be brought to the property on shuttle buses.
Right, I remember that. Thanks.
So it wouldn't even be any parking or any connection whatsoever between the events on the 2 parcels.
That's
Thank you very much, sir. David, did you want to include any other comments or anything in the for them? We're going to end up making a motion.
I think you got a good list.
Okay.
I do have another comment,
Yes.
which is the more that we scratch, the more complicated this situation appears.
Yes.
And it's also hard because only one contract is agendized.
Yeah.
Whereas the developments that they're proposing has overlapping impacts on the other contracts that they also own and operate. And so one suggestion would be, it sounds like we're planning on continuing this item anyways, but one suggestion would be to agendize the remaining contracts to be able to, analyze the situation holistically. I'm also foggy from a year ago, exactly the details here, but from the maps that they provided, it seems like we were relying on some of the irrigated pasturage acreage from the contract that we're discussing that qualified the neighboring contract. And so another request might be for a really sort of detailed accounting of the irrigated pasture acreage from the other contract to make sure that we're still within the 20-acre requirement, because that's an important justification for allowing the principal boarding and breeding facility on the other contract. So again, we need more ability to discuss the other contracts and more information from the other contracts to really be able to piece this all together.
Good comment. Thank you very much, Matthew. And I was going to, for the record, I do have that the adjacent parcel, one of them was 16 AP 017. Do we also have? Does anybody know the contract number? There was just, was it 2?
The third one isn't up, the one to the north isn't under contract up on the
Okay.
Mason.
So just the property, that's the 16 AP 017 in addition to the subject parcel or contract that we're talking about today. Okay, very good. Okay, so again, to recap, we have a map of plantings, graphic depiction of where the grapes are located in acreages, as well as irrigated pasture acreage as well in location because of that issue that Matthew just alluded to. Also planting plan for the vineyard, including purchasing of the grapevines, installation of the grapevines and planting when that would occur. Annual questionnaire, we've already addressed that. But as well as a narrative description of the animal boarding breeding operation on the adjacent contracted land 16 AP 017, in addition to that map that I talked about. So it would show both and also a narrative description of that adjacent contract. And then also maybe we might want also some in that planting plan or some description of the production. And I heard of 5 tons per acre is what the ranch manager was saying, Jeff. So any information on that is always helpful for us because it is based on, like David was saying, not on the acreage planted, but on the case production for the wineries. That about it? Is that total?
Can we add also a narrative just to confirm the tasks and responsibilities of the ag employees, since there's going to be a mix in conversion, just to confirm that, you know, how they will, the duties and tasks that they will be doing in both operations
Both the animal,
and the vineyard.
okay. Does that make sense to those online or in?
Yes, that all
Yes,
makes
okay.
sense. And
So,
I've got that all written down. I think there's
Okay.
5 separate items
Yeah.
there, so we'll-
I'm giving you the detail now because sometimes when you make a motion, you have to be concise. So all that detail is really helpful, I know, to the applicants and the representative. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Well, question to the applicant team. Kind of heard the list of
laundry.
information. Is that something that you believe you could return in time for the August meeting, or do you need more time to, should we continue it further into September?
that should be no problem for us to get that together for the August meeting.
Okay, good.
And as a reminder, that August meeting, it is almost, does it work out to be almost a week or 2 weeks before here in support needs the information in our packets
You
beforehand?
know what? This,
Want to give yourself extra time, that's all.
yeah, let's do September. Let's do September. The,
Okay.
winery approval process through the county is gonna take a long time, so we don't need to be in a
Okay. And it
big
would-
rush on this. Let's do September.
Okay, very good. We could do September.
Hey, I need that, I need this, and then we, back to
Okay,
Committee members,
I'll work it
Francisco
out.
from County Planning.
So,
Before someone made a motion, I
yeah,
just
that's,
wanted to
that's
throw a
the, this
comment
is
out
the
there
only burden I'm
in
like.
case you guys have any recommendations for it.
Outside of.
Regarding the proposed parking, they are proposing to use that 0.8 acre pastures overflow parking. Just wanted to make sure you don't have any comments or recommendations about that.
was that a question for us, sir?
Yes.
Jeff, okay, so there was a question about whether maybe your comment, you need clarification. Oh, I'm sorry.
I can clarify. So the winery project is proposing up to 8 special events a year, and they are proposing overflow parking. And that overflow parking is over the proposed irrigated pasture area of 0.8 acres.
Okay,
And just wanted to see if you had any comments or recommendations on that.
thank you.
I mean, that's kind of common, for
Mhm.
temporary use of those, and so I don't think we have any real issues, Matthew.
I'd say put it on the map when it comes back.
Right, I think
Or
it's
just
important to
indicated as
discuss, yeah.
overflow parking.
Thank you for that clarification.
I mean, there's nothing about parking that's good for irrigated pasture in the agricultural sense. I'm trying to think of examples. I know we allow parking on dry land pasture, which is less sensitive in the dry season to compaction and impact like that. But I mean, it's a stretch to say that it's not an impact to the agricultural operation to be parking on irrigated pasture in the growing season.
We will
Well,
factor that in.
I'm happy to provide more information regarding that. There's only 8 special events a year that are allowed. So it's not going to be an area that's parked on often, and the county's winery ordinance, in the zoning ordinance specifically calls out parking for winery events as being allowed temporarily on pastures. That's where they intend for it to go. So that's where we've put it. I can certainly highlight that in the information that we provide for the next meeting.
To make a comment about the irrigated pastures, that, we irrigate those pastures on a regular basis, but if we knew an event was coming up, and we knew the timing of that event, we would, postpone an irrigation so that the pasture would be dry by the time cars were parked on it. And as soon as the event was over, the irrigation would resume. But I don't see an issue with parking on an irrigated pasture.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's a good point. I guess even just the delayed irrigation is itself, could be construed as a kind of impact to agriculture, but I'm hearing what you're saying, that to prevent long-term compaction, that there is that option.
Right.
Okay, great. So make a motion that we continue this item to the September APAC meeting, provide the applicant time to provide the materials requested. Rather than trying to reiterate the laundry list here, but we'll make sure that if that's okay, that list that we've talked about, we'll just characterize it in the unapproved minutes. And I believe the consultant team has taken note of all of those items that the committee is requesting for our next hearing. So,
Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I wonder if the committee wants to include in its motion directing staff to agendize the other contracts. I think there would be a separate agenda item, but we could discuss them all together.
yes, thank you, Council.
Should that be in our motion?
Do you want to amend your motion? Or we
Did I
take
make
that
the
as a
motion?
separate motion?
Oh.
I think it could be included. Either way is fine.
Did I make?
You didn't include this, so if you want to amend your, sorry.
You made the
I'm making a
motion.
motion. Yes, I will add to my motion, thank you. That we include as a separate item, agendizing contract 16. AP 17 to consider ongoing eligibility. And in relationship to this project. And so that would be my motion.
A second?
I'll second.
Okay, we'll do a roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Aye.
Sergio Ricardo,
Aye.
Stephanie Stark,
Aye.
and David Lackey.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your time today, and we'll see you again in September on this.
Okay, great, thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your engagement and coming and answering our questions today. And we look forward to seeing you
Yeah.
on September.
And thank you, Francisco, for being
Yes.
here to provide us the planner's perspective.
Very helpful.
Sign it.
No
That's
problem.
the
Thank you.
approval date. And that's
Okay, that takes us to, going to go back to our agenda to item number 3, which is 7300 Happy Canyon Ag Improvements. And this is the case that we had continued from June, the last June meeting. At that time, we were discussing in our minutes, maybe the motion was a little bit incorrect, and we're going to go back and take a look at that. But we had quite a discussion at our last meeting, and we've agendized this a little bit differently to be a little bit more comprehensive. But in our packet is information from, I think it's the same thing, essentially from the prior meeting, with the addition of the letter from Mr. Carney. Did you want to say something, Mr. Carney, to start us off with, or? Thank you for that, triggering me on that. Is Tina Mitchell, are you here today with us, the planner?
Hi, Chair Stark. Yes, I'm here. I'm online.
Oh, okay, very good. Is there something you'd like to kick us off with this? Maybe talk about what was discussed at the last meeting and what we're trying to do today?
So yeah, we don't have any new plans or changes to the project description. And the applicant's attorney has provided this letter to kind of provide arguments about the ADU conversion. But yeah, the ADU conversion has been added to the agenda description. And we're just here to get your thoughts on this letter and arguments, I guess. But I'm
Thank you very
available
much.
for questions.
Yes, and so to Mr. Carney's going to give us a little overview and to read this officially into the record. So this is a request of Mike Elliott, agent for the owner of Hawk Canyon 53 LLC. And this is regarding construction of a new agricultural barn and a new agricultural employee dwelling unit. And then a covered porch, and it's the project's consistency with the uniform rules and ongoing eligibility of the project. And this is 138.38 acre parcel in the Santinez area.
Good morning, Chair, staff, and members of the committee. Again, I'm Mark Carney. I'm a land use attorney at Riker Fowle. I represent Hawk Canyon 53 LLC and its managing principal, Eduardo Vasquez. Mr. Vasquez is on Zoom with us today, so if you have any questions you'd like to direct to him, then feel free to do so, or feel free to do so through me. I'm also joined by Mike Elliott, Elliott Post Construction, who is prepping to construct the improvements that we're discussing today. I want to bring this back a little bit to the beginning so we can understand this all in context. My client, Hawk Canyon 53 LLC, purchased the property in September 2020 and was already under a Williamson Act contract at that time. Now, the first thing that Mr. Vasquez did when the purchase was closed was saw the need to reevaluate the business operation, which to him had been rendered dysfunctional over time. And fortunately, he is uniquely qualified to make those assessments because he is a rancher. He has 400 head of cattle under operation in Mexico, and he wanted to improve the ranching operation at this site and bring it into compliance with the Williamson Act. And he's uniquely suited to do so. And so he also knew that there's two things that needed to be done in order to accomplish that. One is to create a business plan for a legitimate agricultural operation, a legitimate grazing operation, keeping in mind the carrying capacity of the property and his attendant desire to preserve the resource over time, to not overgraze. So the first thing that he did as far as the business operation component, which is step one, and the second, by the way, the second step is the improvements necessary for the grazing operation. So you have to create the business plan, put it into operation, and then you need to supplement it with the proper improvements to optimize the grazing operation. So with respect to the creation of the business plan, the first thing we did was evaluate the cattle. And lo and behold, he found that the cattle really weren't capable of creating a viable grazing operation. There were 10 cows on the property. They were the wrong breed. They were very old. All of the bulls had already been castrated, and the cattle was a mixture of different breeds. So the first thing he decided to do was to sell those cattle because there's no way you could run a viable grazing operation with that herd. And so he also, because he knows this stuff, decided the best thing to do was to gauge the foraging capacity of his new property. So within a year of seeing how the resource handled the various seasons, he set out to create a legitimate business plan. And you've seen that in a couple of occasions. And I think everybody was convinced that that was a pretty good turnaround. You know, we've got 15 head of cattle, the same breed, and we have a business plan that is going to go on and on in compliance with the Williamson Act under the management of Mr. Vasquez, and in particular, management of the full-time ranch manager that he hired in order to implement the grazing operation, Mr. Eugenio Perez. Mr. Perez and Mr. Vasquez are ranch guys. They know this business and they know what to do with the business and they know what improvements they need in order to optimize the business. And that's why we're here. We're here to get them, now that they've got the business plan in place, we need the improvements to support that business plan. In the locations where the professionals believe they need to be in order to optimize the grazing operation. I wouldn't presume to tell them where this barn should be. I wouldn't presume to tell them where the APV should be. They're pros, they know it. I defer to them. So what they've decided is now that they've got the grazing operation plan underway, they need to optimize it through these improvements. And the uniform rules, as you know, allow in these circumstances for three types of improvement, residential improvements. One single family residence, one AED, and one ADU. And that's the sum total of what Mr. Vasquez is seeking, compliance with the improvements that are allowed in the uniform rules. Now, they, in their judgment, decided where they think those improvements should go. And they think that the barn, which, by the way, parenthetically, we believe has already been approved. I think the minutes would reflect that. We walked away from the meeting last month concluding, well, we got the barn approved anyway, even though the other goals were being deferred until this meeting. However that plays out, I'm not concerned about that. It's our recollection that we approved the barn and the minutes should reflect that. So in addition to the location of the barn is strategic. The location of the barn is along the ranch road. This is a larger barn. The existing barn is too small. You can't get to it with a big hay truck. You can only get to, you can't get through the winding roads that serve the dwellings with the kind of equipment and materials that are necessary to run a grazing operation. But lo and behold, there's a ranch road that leads directly off of Happy Canyon. So they drew the conclusion that that's where this grazing operation is to be centered. So that's where this new barn is going to be. And that's where, therefore, the new AED should be. Because the current AED is over 40 years old. And we have a brand new manager who got hired for the job. We want to make sure that he has all the tools necessary to run the operation and the level of modern amenities and comfort that you would want your employees to benefit from if you were owning this property. So that's the reason to put the AED and the barn both off the ranch road. It's proximate to all of the other things. We gave a list of duties that Mr. Perez embarks on. Every one of those duties is centered around this area. The solar system, the electric system, the well system, the corral, the new barn, the new AED, the new ranch road, all in the same general city. What this would entail, however, for their vision to materialize, is the conversion of the existing AED to an AED. And that's what tripped us up last time. Because the committee was uncomfortable based upon the language of the uniform rules, agreeing to the conversion of the AED to an ADU because it didn't comply with the committee's perception of what clustering means in this context. And when we discussed the fact that I have a different view of clustering than you do, I look at clustering when we look at the entire property. And clearly, if you look at the entire property, these two residential dwellings are clustered in the bottom quadrant of the upper half of the property. If you look at the property from north to south, these two properties are clustered in the bottom quarter of the upper half, the bottom half of the upper half of the property. So we felt that we complied with clustering, but there was hesitancy. We felt constrained. In fact, Chair, you quoted the language verbatim, which clearly identified why you felt constrained, because there's words that say must and shall. And we understood that you felt your hands were tied because the language says a guest house or ADU were allowed under the zoning ordinance shall be included in the development envelope and must be clustered with the principal dwelling. So I totally understand and respect why there was hesitancy among the committee members with that language. Because unless you could, in good faith, adopt the same perspective of clustering that I've adopted, which is that you need to look at the entire property, not just a section of the property, you didn't feel that you could comply, you could approve the conversion and still comply with the uniform rules. And I respect that. The good news is you no longer need to feel constrained. You no longer need to feel limited. There is no prohibition whatsoever in the law from you approving this because you're concerned that it's not clustered. Actually, you must now consider clustering. That's how it's changed from the research that I did. Because the law doesn't allow you to impose a new standard in assessing an ADU where it's approved. It doesn't allow you to impose a new standard or a discretionary standard. And I wrote a letter, I'm not going to go through again, but I just want to hit the highlights. Basically, the letter made the point, number one, that any land use regulation that conflicts with any local land use regulation that conflicts with state law is void. The state's the boss. If there's something that preempts the field and says what it says, you can't have any kind of regulation, policy, procedure that conflicts with that state law. Secondly, I made the point that state law promotes the creation of ADUs. They're trying really hard to get local agencies to do everything they can to increase the number of ADUs. They set maximum standards for their evaluation, and they specifically prohibit any imposition of discretionary standards. And I wrote a little paragraph on each of those 3 points, which I won't belabor now. And then I made the argument that clustering violates 2 of those provisions. One is a new standard that isn't in state law. And secondly, it's a discretionary standard. It's obvious. We disagree what clustering means because we're using discretion in order to assess it. So it's a discretionary standard which violates state law. Now, I'm not going to read excerpts from my letter, but I am going to read the law for the record. I think it's important, instead of listening to what the lawyer says, to go right to the law. And this is Government Code Section 65852.2A3. Quote, an existing ordinance governing the creation of an accessory dwelling unit by a local agency or an accessory dwelling ordinance adopted by a local agency shall provide an approval process that includes only ministerial provisions, processes for the approval of accessory dwelling units and shall not include any discretionary processes, provisions, or requirements for those units, except as otherwise provided in the subdivision. If a local agency has an existing accessory dwelling ordinance that fails to meet the requirements of the subdivision, that ordinance shall be null and void, and that agency shall thereafter apply the standards established in this subdivision for the approval of accessory dwelling units. It goes on in Section 5 to say this subdivision establishes the maximum standards that local agencies shall use to evaluate a proposed accessory dwelling unit, which is what you're doing. You're evaluating the proposed accessory dwelling unit on a lot that includes a proposed existing single-family dwelling. No additional standards other than those provided in the subdivision shall be used or imposed. So I have had the opportunity to speak with your able counsel, Ms. Kim, with respect to the issue. And I don't want to speak for Ms. Kim, but my conclusion upon speaking to her is that Ms. Kim doesn't disagree with anything I just said with respect to what the law says regarding discretionary standards with respect to ADUs and additional standards imposed that the state law doesn't impose. I think we're in sync on that. Where we part, as I understand through conversations with Ms. Kim, is that Ms. Kim believes that there may be a difference in this circumstance because this is a voluntary program. And the argument goes like this. And I'm sure he's gonna make it better than this. Because we're not preventing you from converting your ADU. Your ADU to ADU. We're not doing that. We're just saying if you do that, then you're not in compliance with the Williamson Act, and you lose all the privileges associated with the Williamson Act. So that's where we need to focus our energy there, because that's the rub. I think we don't need to talk about whether or not state law preempts. I don't think we need to talk about whether or not state law prohibits. We only need to talk about whether there's something different about this, which would allow this body to be the only deliberative body in the state that doesn't need to apply ADU because it's a voluntary program. Now, in anticipation of this argument, in my letter, I addressed 3 reasons off the top of my head why that argument fails. First of all, when the state law says provision like this is null and void, it's as if that provision does not exist in the book, in the law, in the law book. It is not there in law. It has no legal effect. So you need not be constrained. In fact, you must not be constrained because you're reading a provision into the uniform rules that does not exist. It's null and void. It can't be used to help you interpret the result that we're seeking at this hearing. Secondly, it's really a logical argument that also supports this view. Because Section 4 of the Uniform Rules states, quote, "The rules do not supersede the county's land use requirements contained in the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances." In other words, what that means is the uniform rules must comply with the zoning ordinances. Well, we already know the zoning ordinances must comply with state law. That's what that legislative bill, that law that I just read says. So therefore, logically, the uniform rules, which must comply with ordinance, excuse me, with the ordinances, and the ordinances must comply with state law. Therefore, the uniform rules must comply with state law. And they don't. Thirdly, it's not enough to just say, oh, too bad. You're just gonna you can do whichever you want, but you're not going to get the benefits of Williamson because you can't comply with this standard, which does not comport with state law. That's what we're hearing. Now, the county can't deprive legally an applicant for the benefits of one law, which is the Williamson Act, by claiming that they are, for the reason that they're not complying with a rule that violates another state law, which is ADU law. That's what's being told to us, that you can't complain that you're not going to get the benefits to Williamson Act because we're imposing an illegal rule that with which you refuse to comply. Now, that can't strike anybody as okay. My client has the same rights to comply with the Williamson Act as anyone else in the state. If this body imposes a discretionary standard that isn't elsewhere in the state, my client's been deprived of the rights to use this state law with the same benefits of anybody else. And if this is countywide, if ultimately the staff decides they're not going to amend this law to get rid of this section, then everybody in the county is being treated differently than everybody else in any other county who wants to take advantage of the Williamson Act for their agricultural operation. So for me, it's pretty stark that there is a rule that the state law in uniform rules that the state law says is null and void. So not only should you not feel constrained by the obligation to cluster, which is set forth in uniform rules, you mustn't. Now, and the other thing I want to discuss is, to what end would you? Here's a guy who's trying to improve, to take a dysfunctional operation, make it functional, improve it over time, hire a professional ranch manager to do that. And this is in their judgment what's necessary to do so. If we decided instead to take the path that was we were directed towards last month, which is to put the ADU closer to the principal dwelling, because that would comport more fully with your perception of the definition of cluster. And then we build a new AED next to the barn. Well, what becomes of the current AED? We can't make the claim that we need the second AED because we have one full-time ranch manager who's handling the job. We can't turn it to an ADU because we already have an ADU. So then we will have been deprived of the three types we would have a building there, which is available for housing, which is necessary in the county, but it wouldn't be able to be used. No one could occupy it, from what I can tell. And what would be the point of that? Because we can't physically pick up this building that was built in 1983 and move it closer to the principal residence? We're going to leave it vacant, and we're going to risk this grazing operation of shutting down and not providing the food it does to this region, and not providing the employment that this ranch provides for one full-time ranch manager, by which he's feeding his family. Why? Because it's not close enough to comport with the definition of clustering. Now, I understand and respect how you felt your hands were tied before, but you're released. Right? You not only shouldn't feel constrained, you mustn't feel constrained. So that's all I have to say at this stage. Having said that, Chair, I request your indulgence. I assume there's going to be some back and forth with council in deliberations. I would like you to consider a request to reopen the public hearing to allow me, if necessary, to address whatever I hear that I haven't heard yet.
Thank you, Mr. Carney, for the summary and the information about the case, as well as your concerns about the uniform rules and all the detail you provided. And we will, of course, engage with you when we are deliberating as the committee, and if you need any clarification. But first, I wanted to speak with Ms. Kim and see, Ms. Kim, how would you advise the committee based on some of the concerns Mr. Carney's raised? Not all of that is in our agenda. We're looking at the specific case before us. So, and I know you've been having discussions with Mr. Carney. So.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I have spoken with Mr. Carney and reviewed his letter. It doesn't change my opinion. The advice I provided last time. This item is before this body and this year too, which is I think 2 meetings ago. It advised that the land use approval process, the land use entitlement process is separate and distinct from what this committee has jurisdiction over, which is determining whether property is eligible for the voluntary loansment contract. And so the laws that Mr. Carney was referring to, I agree that those are state laws, and that they place limitations in the county's ability to approve an ADU or conversion to an ADU, but they do not prevent this body from applying its uniform rules to the property to determine whether the property would continue to be eligible in the event this AED was converted to an ADU. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know how fruitful it would be to get into the legal back and forth.
Yeah, I agree. And there's and also just what we're agendized for. But I do thank Mr. Carney for bringing those items up. Committee members, what are you thinking? Is anybody, my thoughts are to really go back to take a look at the map, refresh where the locations are. And pretty much what we talked about last time was, I think our concerns were pretty clear. It was just really an issue of how the project was agendized. But I hear what Mr. Kearney, what you brought up, Mr. Carney. But we do follow the advice of county council. So if you have concerns about how the uniform rules are written, then you can always bring those up at another time. And I think maybe talk with David or county council how you can go about doing that.
Are you speaking on behalf of all the members? Sure.
No,
You say
no.
take the advice of county council because
Yeah,
I do think that it's incumbent upon you to hear the advice of county council, but I don't think there's any obligation for the deliberative body to set aside his or her independent judgment based upon advice from council.
well, we work as a committee, but committee members are welcome to speak individually, but our voice through our motions is one. So we take the advice of our council, our county council. And, we are following what is in the current uniform rules. And I hear what your concerns are, but we are advisory.
Right.
So-
But what I will say, what's in the uniform rules now
Mhm.
includes a provision which state law says is null and void. And so my view is that you have to look at uniform rules in compliance with state law. And you have to look at uniform rules as if that provision didn't exist, because it is, as we sit here right now, null and void.
Thank you for your input on that. County council members or committee members, they want to hear from you as well.
Well, I have a comment, and I don't suggest I'm leaning one way or another, but clearly this is a legal issue. The way the uniform rules are written. But my question to Callie is, what are the rights afforded to the applicant if this was denied by this committee? Is there another step? Can this be taken to the Board of Supervisors, for instance? Are there other more rights afforded to the applicant?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I thought about that as well, and a determination by this committee that the project would not be eligible or would no longer be compatible with the Williamson Act is not an appealable decision to the board. I think what probably would end up happening if this body determined that the project would not be compatible and the applicant decided to proceed with getting the permit to convert the property to an ADU, that it would come back to this body to determine whether to recommend to the Board of Supervisors to non-renew the contract. That would go to the board, and Mr. Carney and his client would have the opportunity at that time to make this argument to the Board of Supervisors, who would make their own determination about whether this provision of the uniform rules is no longer applicable due to state law, and could potentially even consider amending the uniform rules.
And even if this committee recommended non-renewal, the applicant has the right to protest the decision for non-renewal, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just to clarify that point, so. And I concur, not that I'm an attorney, but in terms of the process, in terms of if this committee at some point in time recommends non-renewal, it'll go to the board, applicant has the opportunity to provide their perspective. The board may act, one option is to non-renew the contract. That's what the applicant has the ability to appeal the board's decision to non-renew, in addition to their ability to comment on the public hearing consideration. Both points, there's two bites of the apple.
And so to clarify, when we say appeal, we're also saying it's part of the protest process, right?
I don't recall saying appeal, but remind me. So
No.
I think council said that our decision here is not appealable. there is a process that continues with taking our recommendation to the board at that public hearing. There is appeal process in government code for Williamson Act with respect to a decision to non-renew. But in terms of just our advisory motion, there is no appeal process associated with that.
Thank you. I apologize. That you said.
Maybe I can just add to that. And so if council could also weigh in on, so the committee's motion doesn't dictate the decision on the land use permit. The planning and development department can, well, in this case, it's a building permit, there's both. They're not holding to this decision. It's a separate consideration on the merits of the applications and whether or not they approve or issue permits for that use.
That is correct. That's my understanding, that any determination by this county wouldn't prevent the planning department from issuing a permit. And as Mr. Carney's pointed out, there's really very few options. The planning department will probably have to issue the permit because ADU law is administered.
So just to clarify that if I heard this correctly, I'm just going to repeat. You're saying that the project could be approved by planning regardless of what we do here, whether we say it's in non-compliance or not.
The permit to convert the AED to an ADU could be approved regardless of what this committee determines with respect to eligibility for the bonus unit.
Okay, thank you.
And just so I understand, perhaps this question for David or maybe for you or Callie. But so there's a land use permit and then there's a zoning clearance, right? So there's two things that are listed today on our agenda.
I mean, also technically, for the conversion of the AED to an AEU.
Right.
State law in our ADU ordinances, that's issued just strictly through a building permit. There's no land use permit associated with it. And so, and that's kind of a wrinkle separately in terms of typically we only see land use permit entitlements. Normally see building permits because
This is just because it's part of a larger project.
Because it's large.
I see.
And because it's we don't, like if there's ADU applications separately that in the past, maybe an attached ADU, we generally have a quick check with the building and zoning team and don't bring it to the committee.
I see.
But this was collectively involved with other applications.
And so the LUP and the zoning clearance, those would both go through the planning process, but there's no, it doesn't go to the zoning administrator or doesn't. How does that? I'm just trying to understand the process a little bit, getting at what
land use permits are typically, they're approved by at the director level.
Yeah.
And same with zoning clearances in general. They're at that director level.
And when we make our motions through any case, we are making recommendations, advisory to the decision maker on what is consistent or not consistent with the uniform rules. Okay.
Correct.
In a simpler scenario, the contracts, the Williamson Act contract is a rolling 10-year contract. And even if property was non-renewed, further development would not be allowed for 9 years as they roll out of the contracts. So in this case, is that related to this case at all? I mean, if the transition is made from AED to ADU, it's immediate, presumably. and they would be out of compliance, it sounds like, with the uniform rules. They would be non-renewed, but what is the, I mean, typically there's some teeth that the Williamson Act has in terms of not allowing development for the 10 years after the contract, as the contract rolls out, but is that pertinent in this particular case?
So in a hypothetical situation, if a recommendation and if a contract is, if the board approves non-renewal of the contract, then that's starts the countdowns, from a full 10 years remaining on the contract. So in that non-renewal period, our rules and state law still says that you're still under contract and you're still subject to compliance with all of the uniform rules. But admittedly, we know that there's not a lot of teeth other than that. In extreme cases, we've seen where somebody just doesn't have planted acreage and they have no intent to plant acreage. We can't force them to go and plant to meet your requirement in a non-renewal. And so, but we will still, the committee still, if there's applications for land use entitlements on that non-renewed contract land, they're still agendized and reviewed individually for compatibility. But there isn't any categorical prohibition on any additional development of any sort, because you're a non-renewal.
But 5 years later, if they came back and wanted to build a pool or a tennis court, they would still be beholden to the uniform rules.
Correct. We would review it still in terms of its, and any changes in, making sure they still have their commercial ag production, all of those things. We'd still look at it at a point in time for consistency of the uniform rules.
Madam Chair, may I add, the Williamson Act also provides other enforcement options that I don't know that the county would decide to utilize, but there's, breach of contract lawsuits that could be filed, and there's a material breach provision in the Williamson Act. So in the event that there was blatant non-conformance with the contract, there are options that this committee could consider at a future date, recommending to the board. The board would ultimately need to decide whether to pursue something like that.
Oh, material breach conversations, those were all the rage 15 years ago. Haven't heard much about that one. Aside from questions, you want to move into
if we could
kind of perspectives.
Yeah, if we could pull up a map showing, is that the map right there? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So I discussed this previously, and I'll dust it off again. One way to view this is sort of an exception, and identified kind of past examples that we encounter with existing structures on ranches that may have been very old and constructed, before zoning and before permits, before, in this case, an example where it's been constructed and allowed under a now antiquated repealed zoning ordinance. In comparison to looking at something, from that's a new proposal. And in other examples, we've recognized that, there may have been these 3-4 ag bunkhouses on a property, and they may be spread out, not necessarily in a convenient envelope that we typically look at. And so often, we've looked at the circumstances of those situations and acknowledged those as for what they were, and then made and not a strict adherence to other standards. And so I can view this similar to that, in that the AED in question was permitted under Ordinance 661 specifically for that use, for housing for employees engaged in agriculture. And because it exists, it plays a part in all of these considerations of clustering and envelope barbell configurations. And so at least I offer one approach is that could be a consideration as an exception because of those circumstances, that not necessarily having to apply the strict adherence in terms of clustering and envelope configuration. And so that's at least for one perspective that I want to at least still have out there for consideration.
I think I can support your suggestion. But I would like this conversation about the conflict between the uniform rules and the state law to continue the conversation to see if the uniform rules need to be updated. I would like to keep, to do that if it needs to be updated. But I would, I would support your suggestion.
And yeah, I appreciate yeah, because none of us here, have that legal acumen. And perhaps that can be a separate motion that we continue that conversation with council and maybe just an advisory or something in terms of where to move forward with that. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you for reminding us of that position, and based on all of the information and documentation that's been provided to us, I don't feel like I can support that determination. This as an exception. It just, given the totality of what's been presented, it's just the case hasn't been strong enoughly made in my mind that, both the proximity of the new ag employee dwelling is absolutely critical to the functioning of the agricultural operation. I understand that, what's ultimately wanted by the property owner is a primary residence, an AED, and an ADU. What currently exists is a primary residence and an AED. The far simpler solution here would be to add the ADU to the property. I don't feel like it's this body's responsibility or within our purview currently to make a legal decision about the evidence that Mr. Carney presented. And so I feel compelled to follow the uniform rules as they're currently written, unless, we're given strict instruction not to. And, the uniform rules clearly states that the ADU needs to be located nearby the primary residence within the envelope. And what's being presented is not that. It seems like they're switching classifications to be able to have 3 remote sightings for buildings without strong justification for doing that, and without making the justification that what will be the new ADU is clustered with the primary residence, which is not. So again, just to summarize, I wouldn't support that as this particular instance is an exception.
Yeah, that leaves me. Yeah, it's interesting what you brought up, Mr. Carney, and I guess I am feeling like, not feeling, but what you presented concerns me if we are not in consistent with state law, or we are in direct conflict with state law. But I think that that's another discussion that we will have down the road. I think given what we're looking at here today with the project and with the uniform rules that we have, even though it is under an antiquated ordinance and it is existing, it does say shall, in the ordinance or in the uniform rules. So I am more in line with what Matthew was saying, that just based on what it says in there. And I am very much of the mind that this is a legitimate operation. I have no doubt in my mind on that. It's just the way that it's reading in the uniform rules. And I think it could be, the project could be changed to adapt to what the uniform rules say and be consistent with them. So yeah, but I appreciate what David has put forth and his spirit of just trying to get to a happy medium. I completely understand that. So before, looks like Mr. Carney is going to say a couple things before you do that. So I wanted to see, was there anybody here today who'd like to speak on this project, either in person or joining us through remote online? Okay, not seeing any. We close public comment. Is there any more discussion from committee members along that thread? Okay, if you want to speak, Mr. Carney, maybe a brief statement or two, and then we can bring it back to the committee for an action item.
Briefly,
Motion.
thank you very much. I think that you have the discretion to follow through on Mr. Lackey's suggestion. This is an aberration. This is an exception. We're asking for a conversion of an AED to an ADU. And from an existing building. We can't move the building. We can't make it, we can't place it any closer. So, but that's not persuasive to two of you. So I'll ask again, will you take another look? Will you reconsider the concept of clustering and make a determination as to whether or not this falls within the requirement for clustering? I think it's an illegal rule. I think that ultimately it's going to be proven that way. And it's a shame that we're going to have to go through all this effort to go to the Board of Supervisors, and we're going to have to go to the Board of Supervisors. The only reason that they recommend that we're out of compliance is we refuse to comply with a rule that violates state law. That's what we'll say to the Board of Supervisors. We refuse to comply with a rule that conflicts with state law, and therefore they told us we were out of compliance. So we're trying to avoid that, the expense associated with that, imposition on the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately the conflictual nature of that, which will have its own timeline and costs. So I'd like to make a last gasp effort to urge you to look at this property. Right now, look at this in the context of that portion of the property, and you come to the conclusion that it is not clustered. This is not the entire property, though. There's another slide that shows the entire property. This is half of the property. The other half is down to the south of this. And so when you look at the entire property and you segment it into 4 sections, north and south, I'd like you to reconsider in an assessment of that, whether you agree that the proposed agricultural grazing operations are clustered in the northern quadrant, that the residential dwellings are clustered in the quadrant of the property immediately south to the clustered grazing operations, and that the bottom half of the property is completely open grazing area. Now, would anybody dispute the fact that those proposed grazing operations are clustered? I don't think so. But they're just as close to one another as those two buildings are. Yet we have a determination that those aren't clustered. And I don't understand. Why are we trying so hard to say those aren't clustered when it's easy to say that they are? And we don't have to go through all this. We get a grazing operation, which is compliant with law, to turn a dysfunctional operation into a functional operation. We've got an ADU that provides more housing for the community. We've got an operation that provides more food for the region. And we have an employee able to feed his family. That's all you have to do in order for all that to happen, is look at this logically, use your discretion to come to the conclusion that when you look at the entire property, those two residential dwellings are in fact clustered. If you can do that, which I'm asking you to reconsider doing, then we don't have to go down this path of us challenging the ordinance and ultimately seeking the private attorney general attorney's fees in order to get to the point where we get this ordinance changed to comply with state law, because that will happen. You can't be the only deliberative body in the state that doesn't comply with state law. You can't. So in order to avoid that scenario, I'm asking you to take a harder look, a renewed look at this map and see if the grazing operations clustered in the northern quadrant, dwelling operations are clustered in this quadrant just below. In the lower two quadrants are all grazing operations. Those are the clustered uses and clustered improvements on this property. And you have the capacity to use your discretion to conclude that. And we can end this today. So I'll ask your indulgence in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just very briefly.
Go ahead.
Mr. Carney has several times stated that this county cannot be the only county in the state of California that doesn't follow state law. And I haven't had a chance to look at every county, but it would be very surprising to me if other counties did not also have restrictions on the placement of ADUs. And in fact, I do know of one county that prohibits any ADUs being on SNAP contracted properties. I don't know if that's permissible under state law, but I just, the idea that this county is the only one with uniform rules that restrict the placement of ADUs, I don't know if that's supported by anything that I have seen to date. Happy to look into that in the future, but I just wanted to make that point to you to the extent it affects your decision.
Thank you, Kelly.
I just want to make a clarification. I didn't say you're the only county that has these uniform rules. What's going on here is ADU law is recent. We've got adopted in the last couple of years. Everybody's going to have to change any rules that add discretionary provisions. Whether they've done so or not now doesn't matter. They're already void. The state looks at them as though they don't exist already.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Yes.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to respond, Mr. Carney, to your argument about clustering. And I hear what you're saying. And I guess in response, I would say that the manner with which you're asking us to think of clustering is a manner which we've never thought of clustering, that we've always had a requirement that parcels be, or excuse me, the property or that developments be clustered in a manner that is within a reasonably shaped 2-acre building envelope. And so, sort of complying with your request that we change our own personal definition of clustering would be unfair to the dozens of applicants that have come before you where we've requested and required that changes be made to comply with the way that we've always understood clustering to be.
Mr. Mackey's suggestion in recognizing that this is different. That we aren't coming and saying, hey, we'd like to build an ADU. Where do you think it should be? That's not what we're doing. We're saying there's an existing underutilized space. And ADU law promotes conversions of space more than anything else. It's the most efficient way to proceed. So that's what we're saying. Take into consideration the fact that this is an aberration, that these are exceptional circumstances.
Yeah, and Mr. Carney, we understand that. Thank you for your input. I think what Matthew was trying to say was, and I had the same thought when I appreciate you trying to say to expand our view of what the clustering means, but mentally for me, it didn't get me where I think you wanted me to go. But because we've always kind of viewed it in there's even descriptions in there about barbells and peninsulas and just trying to narrow that language down. And I just over the years, understanding working with the uniform rules, I bet the statement shall and may or shall and must were put in there specifically for a reason, probably. But from when I look at it, I feel like I'm locked in. But for county council or my committee members, if there's something I'm missing in the interpretation of that, please. I see where David's going, and I like that collaborative approach. This doesn't happen very much in our committee. We always try and approach something that is at least some level of a win-win. But I just interpret, at least when my other hat that I wear normally is, those are very strong words, and perhaps I'm interpreting it too strictly. But when I see a shall, then and a must, it just looks pretty strict to me. But if there's something I'm missing from committee members that may have been on the committee longer than me, or from Callie.
Sure, you're using your discretion is what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're using your discretion to conclude that this isn't
Yeah.
comply with your definition of cluster.
Yeah, and that's
exactly
how
what
I
you-
interpret that.
Right, but that's
Right.
exactly what you can't. do.
Right.
You can't use your discretion.
Thank you, Mr. Carney.
So before someone jumps in this deep end to try to make a motion. So I think a couple of considerations, depending upon what motion is made and where it goes, I think consider what we took action in that second motion on the farm employee dwelling last time. Is that going to be looped into resolving that as part of somebody's motion? So I think consider that. And then just separately, I think it would help be fruitful. And so I'm going to offer just a separate motion just to request council provide us more information on the perspective which we support. I think generally we haven't had a motion on supporting it, but in terms of just the relationship with our uniform rules and voluntary contract, but it would be helpful to get any additional information of whether or not you believe there's potential uniform rule amendments for clarification of things that potentially the board may want to consider in recommending that the board of supervisors pursue in the future. So, but absent going into that, I just plan on making a motion something like that. I think it would be valuable. Well, I'll start with a motion, and I don't know if it'll pass, but at least I'll put it out there.
David, may I interrupt and just ask a procedural quick? So what's being agendized is for a new ag employee dwelling, which would require that the existing ag employee dwelling already be transitioned to an ADU. Correct?
I would view it that way because I think it even acknowledged the applicant that there's not a demonstrated need for two ag employee dwellings. And sorry, I guess that's my specific response to your question.
I'm just thinking this through. I mean, do we need to wait for the current AED to be transitioned to an ADU before we're able to vote on this? To pass it?
This is Tina. I may be able to provide a little bit of background on this topic. So I talked with our building and safety division because this applicant, we asked them to submit a building permit application for the conversion. So we didn't run into this issue. And building and safety confirmed that they would not need a building permit since it's a strict conversion from residential to residential. So our plan was to basically document the conversion under the zoning clearance for the AED, the new AED. And basically, once that zoning clearance is issued, it would have a statement that says the existing ag employee dwelling is hereby converted to an ADU.
So did you say the timing of that is going to be tied to the zoning clearance for the proposed new ag employee dwelling?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it also ties, Matthew, in terms of particularly because of that conversion. It's likely to play out regardless of what direction we go. I guess in terms of our motion of finding it consistent or inconsistent.
There's nothing about approving. I don't know, I'm just now a little hung up. I mean, I have no objection to confirming that this operation justifies having an agricultural employee dwelling. But it has an ag employee dwelling currently. I don't think it's been demonstrated that they need 2 ag employee dwellings. So I'm just trying to understand process here. So are we voting on whether they've demonstrated the need for 2 ag employee dwellings? Or just, I'm a little tied up.
I mean, I think what's agendized is sort of a future state. There's proposals to build the new barn, a new ag employee dwelling, and not necessarily a proposal, but it will be not even issuance of a new building permit. It'll just be acknowledging conversion of that AED. So that's the future state. The future state will be that configuration. And I think that's what the committee should view in terms of consistency with uniform rules.
And so the process here, if we're voting on a future state, that's honestly not totally agendized here, because and I don't know that it would need to be, but there's no discussion of the AED, ADU conversion.
It is described at the bottom. It's after.
Oh, forgive me. Okay. So we're voting on a future state. And so then at some point, if my position is if this future state is approved, that they would be out of compliance with the uniform rules. And at that point, would this committee trigger non-renewal or a material breach of contract, or what would the process be? Who makes that decision and how does that get agendized?
So yeah, in that scenario, if any other thing, if the committee is made aware of circumstances that they believe are creating instances or potential incompatibility, and we would go through the normal process like we do in terms of, in that case, it might just be a straight, we'd have to agendize it to direct the chair to send out a 60-day letter regarding that, and then we'd have a hearing on that. And one potential consequence could be non-renewal, or whether or not there were issues and that align with the potential material breach statutes. But, yeah.
Thank you.
So like if we were to play out that scenario, let's say, the applicant moves forward with the, well, we make our motion today, let's say that there's not support for doing the conversion. And then it goes to the planner, takes it to the director made decisions, director looks into the issues that Mr. Carney has brought up, and that you have looked at with county council, you have more time to review it. And let's say the director makes a decision that, that the committee's Ag Preserve Advisory Committee's decision, they decide to overrule that, or whatever words you want to use. They move forward with issuing the permit because of state law, let's say, then that would not be inconsistent with the uniform rules.
They're two separate processes. So I mean, the department's decision in that playing out to then, yes, well, in this case, they would only issue the permits for the new ag employee dwelling and barn and porch.
Yes.
Because building official has said they don't need to issue a building permit for just the conversion. So but they would make that determination of change in use tied to the zoning clearance for that new ag employee dwelling. So yeah, the department will make their own, they're not, our motion isn't binding on their decision to issue that permit. But if that happens, our committee can then take the next steps that typically we would normally do is to send out a 60-day letter to the property owner that we're going to agendize, the contract for consideration of ongoing eligibility. So it kind of continues separately.
What if it's determined at that time that the uniform rules are problematic as written and that we do need to amend them? Maybe that's a question for county council. Do we continue down the road with our uniform rules as interpreting them as written and write a letter and continue on with enforcement, even though the uniform rules may be problematic?
Is the question if there's two separate paths, one path just looking at the uniform rules and whether they need to be amended and separately in action on this particular item? And how
No, like together, looking at them together. So if it's identified that the uniform rules are inconsistent with the state law, would we still continue down that path of potential inconsistency with the uniform rules of this particular applicant, knowing that that might be an issue? Maybe
no,
I'm not
I think-
explaining it right.
I think if, for instance, the Board of Supervisors determined that our uniform rules were inconsistent with state law and needed to be amended.
Yeah.
We would take care of that in conjunction with this project, presumably. I have not seen anything to date that convinces me that our uniform rules are inconsistent with state law. To the extent that that's a question, I'm happy to do more research and give a more robust presentation, but I don't want
To entertain that any further.
no, I just don't want it to seem as though I'm undecided on this issue.
I
It's
see.
Pretty clear to me.
Okay.
that Our rules are not inconsistent with state law, and Mr. Carney and I just disagree on that legal issue, which we can play out, in the future, but I'm happy to look into it in more detail, and I think if there was a determination that that the rules should be amended,
Okay.
then we could revisit the project and like that. Certainly.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so I will, like I said, offer up a motion. That the committee find the request for construction of new agricultural barn, new agricultural employee dwelling unit with covered porch, and conversion of existing AED to an ADU consistent with uniform rules based on the facts of that apply to uniquely to this property regarding the existence of the current AED, which was approved under ordinance 661. And the location and proximity to the existing dwelling and the ability to directly comply with the uniform rule requirements for clustering and envelope configuration.
In a second,
Okay, we have a first and a second. I'll do a roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Nay.
Sergio Ricardo,
aye.
Stephanie Stark,
Aye.
and David Lackey.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1.
Good thing we have this recorded because I was like just riffing. And so then I would also make a second motion that the committee requests council provide or conduct additional research into the issues raised with respect to Mr. Carney's letter and claims that our uniform rules are inconsistent with state law. And then, provide that information to the committee at the appropriate time and any other research or recommendations that may be associated with that from council's perspective.
And I'll second that motion. I want to offer a comment that the reason, I still feel like there needs to be more clarification about this potential conflict. I do feel that the applicant provided, the owner is in good faith trying to comply with the uniform rules. And for that reason, I supported the motion which is passed. But I think there needs to be a little more conversation about the potential conflict between the uniform rules and the state law. So I second the motion.
We have a first and a second. We'll do a roll call. Matthew Shapiro,
Aye.
Sergio Ricardo,
Aye.
Stephanie Stark,
Aye.
and David Lackey.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you very much for your time, all those folks representing Mr. Carney and the ranch manager and the owner and the planner as well, and all your work to get this project through the process and all the deliberation and discussion and the patience. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. And we would like to thank you all as well for your careful consideration of that request. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question. Do we or should we revisit the minutes or I guess we still probably want to look at the accurate characterization of the motion, right?
Yeah, I would.
So,
Okay, so that brings us to our item, which is the annual Williamson Act questionnaire, no response list. And we have here, Sergio's here, perhaps.
And Madam Chair, I invited ag appraiser Gabe Cabello. He can provide the information on the non-responder lists that have been provided to you guys and that we are about to discuss. Gabe has been with the assessor's office for almost 9 years, and he has been part of the ag crew for the last 3 years. And he's here to get us going with this discussion. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I just have a couple highlights that we wanted to hit on regarding the discussion item.
Jonathan, can you bring up the Word document that was, I just added it to the box. Sorry, Gabe.
That's okay. All right, so as you all may know, there are a total of 1,306 agricultural preserve contracts. The annual milling is sent out every January to every contract. A deadline of a month is given, but we accept them all the way to June. Information has to be provided on the questionnaire, including varietal types, crop types, tree types, land uses, new plantings, new construction, production income, expenses. This information is useful in correctly calculating the restricted portions of agricultural properties and ensuring properties have maintained eligibility in the program. And the response rate over the past 10 years has steadily declined from 74% back in 2014 and 2015, now down to 65% this year. We also have some legal references that we cited. Santa Barbara County Uniform Rule 1-2.3B that's applicable to all contracted land. In order to ensure compliance with the production requirements in section 1-2.3, agricultural operations on contracted land shall maintain records of annual productive acreage and its production value to demonstrate continued eligibility and make this information available to the county upon request. And also California Government Code section 51247. The landowner shall furnish the city or county with such information as the city or county shall require in order to enable it to determine the eligibility of the land involved. Well, that's my little introduction. If you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's helpful. I think you might have mentioned it. So when does the assessor's office send these out? Like in 2024? Is it like in early?
Yeah, like early January, usually like first week of January.
And David, and as you have noticed, I try to make this requirement, I try to make a point that we need to have this information every time somebody comes in and I discover that they haven't provided the information in the past. So so yes, we send the questionnaire to every single one of these 13, more than 1,300 contracts every year. But now I'm trying to make sure that if somebody doesn't comply with this, that at least I send a new request or a new questionnaire to the people that come before the APAC committee. So yeah, so we send them out, but we also may request it here through APAC.
I noticed on the example here, because that was part of that 1,300. That's inclusive of conservation easements.
No. I took out.
So
Well,
you have number
yes.
12 there as a CE.
Oh yeah, that is correct. So the total number of 1306 does not include conservation easement. That number is strictly just ag preserves. But in this report, you clearly see that there are some conservation easements.
But do you send the questionnaire to conservation easement
We do.
holders? Okay,
Right.
because some of them, I mean, the easement may be for agricultural purposes, and that's how they get the assessment value.
Absolutely,
Right.
yes. It's the same. We value conservation easements exactly the same as we do ag reserves.
My personal opinion, it feels really inexcusable to me that people in the county benefiting from the Williamson Act tax subsidies aren't responding to the county when asked to respond. And, you know, of the 1,306, you know, the 65% response rate, that means 457 holders, ag preserve contract holders aren't responding, at least last year. And I know it's a smaller list for folks who have consistently not responded, but I do think that this moment could and should be a kind of call to action to have a little bit more follow through. And I don't know where that follow through comes from, if it's generated at this committee level or from the assessor's office or a different place. I mean, obviously 457 contracts is a lot of contracts for us to process as a committee that meets monthly. But I wonder if more strongly worded language in the January letter, you know, would incentive, you know, would be a stick. I wonder, I don't know, I doubt that these letters are sent with certified mail to confirm receipt. You know, that would be maybe a first step. So I would welcome response to that if people agree or not, and with ideas about what enforcement looks like and what's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my thoughts. If there was any strong language advisory of consequences in the current questionnaire that they receive, and if not, maybe that's something that is up front that they know, you know, they're on notice that there could be consequences.
I mean, we definitely cite the legal references that Gabe described on with his presentation.
Do we ever, I mean, that's a good question. Do you guys get like any return rate of undeliverable notices that kind of, maybe we have just, you know, in some of our addresses or?
I don't know.
maybe
Yeah, I don't think we have like a percentage in terms of like undeliverables, but we definitely do try to reach out to different addresses. I know our front staff, like if they do get return mail, they'll try a different address like the Citus, and try to send it back out to try to get it to them. So we definitely try to, you know, make multiple attempts to get the letters to them.
Do we know if any other jurisdictions do like an online option where they can provide that information? I mean, I know some of this is sensitive information, but I'm sure there's ways that, you know, you can line up, like send them a code and then here's your, you can provide this all online.
Not that I know of. I know that the our department has an option to respond online for business property statements. But we don't have one for our annual questionnaire. And I'm not aware of any county that offers that option. Yeah, I don't.
I mean, the only thing we would do like anywhere close to that is like accepting it by email.
Yeah, just maybe, I mean, convenience can be one of those factors that may help increase response rates. So it's something to consider in terms of weighing the cost of setting up something like that and whether or not we think it might be.
I wondered if, yeah, if there were any like, we do the crop report every year. It's different. This is voluntary. They're getting a benefit, right? But with the crop report, there are just some people that it's an issue for them. It's like, is that kind of your sense what's going on with, I'm just looking focused on these 5 and 10 year no responses. Are these folks that just don't want to respond, or they're just, busy or what's kind of your sense? And do you ever follow up with phone calls? That was another question I had. It sounds archaic, but that is at least for the ag folks with our crop report, that is how we get the data, is phone calls.
Yeah, I think maybe that's something we could look into, is maybe try to reach out to these people who have not been responding by phone to try to get a feel, for why they're not responding. But that's not something I think that we have emphasized on, is like trying to, reach out to them, because we have so much volume that we're trying to like.
No, I understand.
process, Yeah.
I was just kind of wondering, like, might be worth digging in a little bit as to, what is it a barrier of, like, if it was online, like David was saying,
Yeah.
maybe there's a combination of that, or I'm not making excuses for people. I'm just sort of thinking out loud.
Right.
Could it also be that, they don't, and maybe that in addition to changing up the language of the letter.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but MBAR starts at 12:30
Oh,
and David's been messaging me, so we need to wrap up. a little
okay.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
One comment is, I feel like it's outside our bandwidth as a committee to really deal with the situation. And for me, again, I feel like it's an urgent situation, and I think it has, financial ramifications for the county. And I just wonder if perhaps another pathway would be to recommend, and I don't know what the correct language would be, but to recommend to the Board of Supervisors some sort of task force or some sort of extra resources, or a separate ad hoc committee that could investigate this issue and could put the time into following up with the 136 contract holders that haven't responded for 5 years, or the 457 who didn't respond last year. I mean, it's going to be a process to really hold their feet to the fire. But at the end of the day, I think it's in the county's financial interest to do so.
And at the same time, included with, looking at all this information is maybe looking at what other counties are doing to.
Yeah, if we have that.
Right, we'll
I
bring that
guess-
up at the
Yeah.
Ag Roundtable.
Exactly. I know we brought this up in the past. I can't remember, but that might be, if anything, a good place to start and see what maybe they're.
Well, I'm thinking at least for starters, I see this as being a compliance issue. So if they're not providing this information, at least we need to recognize when they come to APAC to say, well, you're not in compliance. And, I've tried to make that point. I think we probably as a committee need to make a stronger point that, and I appreciate that you guys help me when I'm making this claim.
Yeah, and Matthew has brought that up, like perhaps we should include that in our motion. In contingent upon, and we mentioned it today to two of the cases today that came in, that, so hopefully when they come, they would have already started that process.
And I know we need to wrap up, so I can talk my other thoughts to Sergio separately offline, but if we're done with that, so thank you both for that information. I just wanted another advisory, so probably, and I'll be working with the chair, but probably starting on our August meeting, we're going to agendize the Ag Enterprise Ordinance. EIR is going to be released in early August. We had talked about potential uniform rules amendments for farm stays, and now we're going to come back to you to consider any additional amendments for some of the other uses. And so I think we're going to start agendizing that for August and likely September. If we provide if APAC provides staff direction, then we'll come back in September with some language potentially to take action on it. So I just want to give you a heads up.
Any other quick reports from committee members?
I do have a personal report, which is that I will be leaving my position with the UC in the fall. And so we'll be leaving the committee. Next month will be my last meeting. Personal life changes, moving up to San Mateo County. And it's with a heavy heart that I leave Santa Barbara County and Ventura County, where I also work. And I'll be here next month, but I just wanted to sort of give warning so it wasn't abrupt. And then on to follow up on that, Royce Larson is my alternate. I do think there needs to be he's not far from retirement himself. And so there needs to be a conversation, maybe including this group. I know that this position is slated for a cooperative extension into representative. I don't know how much flexibility there is there. And perhaps there are the other of us who would fill this role. I know that sort of cattle rep has served, for decades on this committee, but maybe, we do have viticulture experts and orchard and row crop folks. So it could be, maybe it looks a little something different.
Thank you. We're so sad.
And we'll be in the third floor of Riviera Conference Room, same address. We will not be in the Planning Commission here room next week or next month. Thank you.